Efforts to reach a ceasefire and hostage deal in the Israel-Hamas conflict still face serious challenges. Is the region now on the brink of further violence? Hello everyone, I'm Asiye Namdar in for Anna Naidu, and you're watching The Heat. Talks aimed at bringing about a ceasefire in Gaza have so far failed to deliver. Egypt, Qatar, the U.S. working with Israel and Hamas on a potential deal that would also see the release of hostages. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has wrapped up yet another visit to the region. We begin with this report from CGTN's Adel Mahrouhi in Cairo.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken left after meeting leaders of Egypt, Qatar and Israel. But still, no ceasefire deal in Gaza has been reached, where war has raged for more than 10 months. The meetings were described as positive and constructive, but challenges remain. The United States said it proposed an agreement that bridges gaps between Hamas and Israel. Israel says it accepts that proposal. Few details have been announced. Hamas on Tuesday rejected President Biden's accusation that the group is backing away from an agreement, saying the proposal reverses what had already been agreed to. Earlier on Sunday, Hamas rejected the U.S. bridging proposal, saying it doesn't guarantee an end to the war and Israel's military withdrawal. Blinken says a deal needs to get done because time is of the essence. Egypt and Hamas are both calling for full Israeli withdrawal from the Rafah crossing and the corridor on the border between Egypt and Gaza. So far, they don't seem willing to push for a deal without these two demands. Adel Mahrouhi, CGTN, Cairo.
And for more, let's turn to our distinguished panel. Dan Arbell, a veteran of the Israeli Foreign Service. He's currently a scholar in residence at the Center for Israeli Studies at American University. Also with us, Khalil Jahshan. He's the executive director of the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. Joining the discussion, too, is Trita Parsi. He's the executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. And with us as well is Edmund Ghareeb. He's a Middle East scholar and analyst. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let me begin with this elusive ceasefire, if you will. Dan Arbell, what is going on? U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken wrapping up his 9th visit to the region. It appears he's come back empty-handed. What is the stumbling block? What is the issue at this point?
So there were talks over the weekend in Qatar, and then they moved to Cairo. And it seemed people were optimistic that this is moving in the right direction. It seems that, first of all, Hamas is still not willing to accept a compromise, as it hopes that Iran and Hezbollah will launch an attack on Israel, hoping that it will lead to a regional escalation, a widening of the conflict. And I think that's what motivates Hamas not to agree to any deal. On the Israeli side, Prime Minister Netanyahu has added some demands, especially retaining control or presence of the IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, in the Philadelphia corridor, which separates the Gaza Strip from Egypt, and along the Netzarim corridor, which cuts the Gaza Strip between north and south. And that is something that is, first of all, unacceptable to Egypt. Hamas objects to that. Blinken was hoping to have a deal. In the beginning of the week, it seemed like a good chance, perhaps. Right now, at the end of the week, it seems like we're moving away from any resolution of this, unfortunately, anytime soon.
Khalil, I'm not sure what has been, I mean, we've heard reporters and Blinken describing these discussions as positive and constructive. I'm not sure where the positive and the constructive part really come in. And these new demands by Israel, are they really new demands, or have they been there this whole time? What is your take on this?
Well, certainly the 9th trip by the Secretary of State to Israel to kind of try to lock in an agreement with regards to a ceasefire and exchange of hostages and prisoners has turned into an embarrassment, frankly. And I can't see it as a confusion in terms of translation or language. Both the Secretary and the Prime Minister of Israel speak English very well. And apparently, as soon as the Secretary left the Prime Minister's office, getting some, in his own, if you will, assessment, was a positive response from the Prime Minister with regards to that bridging gap bridging proposal that the administration was proposing with regards to some of the issues that Dan just mentioned. Apparently, the Prime Minister changed his tone. I mean, he kind of speaks to his guests in English in one way and speaks in Hebrew to the Israeli public, and his interviews were totally different. He insisted after the departure of the Secretary of State, embarrassing him both internationally and in Washington, saying that as if the Secretary of State misunderstood him, that Israel is still holding to its position with regards to both the Philadelphia corridor and to the Netzarim passage or corridor, and that Israel will not give up its military presence in both. Clearly, I think what the administration is talking about contradicts Israeli purposes, like it did since the beginning of this conflict. I mean, initially, Israel was saying that it wants to destroy, eliminate totally Hamas militarily and politically. Then it failed to do so. The U.S. adjusted its position a bit in terms of nuances. And now it seems like Netanyahu is changing his mind about the North. It looks to me like, again, based on past experience and looking at Israeli demands in previous negotiations over the past 76 years, I see or I smell some kind of new Israeli ambition with regards to northern Gaza. It's really using the Netzarim corridor essentially to try to grab as much land as possible. As a buffer zone in northern Gaza.
So Dan, let me quickly come back to you. Does Israel have new ambitions, as Khalil just mentioned, when it comes to Gaza?
No, I don't think so. I think that, first of all, Israel wants to make sure that those Gazans returning from the south to the north are not terrorists, and therefore it wants the ability to monitor their return. Second thing, returning to northern Gaza or Israeli presence or reoccupation of northern Gaza is not on the Israeli agenda. Netanyahu has stated that some elements in his extreme right elements in his coalition want it, but it's not going to happen. That's not the case.
Trita, as this is something that Khalil also mentioned, Netanyahu from day one of this conflict has said his main goal is to eradicate and eliminate Hamas. But even the Israeli army spokesman says Hamas is an ideology as well. You cannot eliminate Hamas. Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, in an interview, this is what he said, Trita: Hamas cannot be destroyed. Hamas is an idea. Those who think it can be made to disappear are wrong. Are divisions emerging between Netanyahu and his own military?
Absolutely, but some of those divisions have existed earlier on as well. I mean, already back in November of last year, former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert wrote an op-ed in Israeli media, and the opening sentence was that there is no such thing as a military defeat of Hamas. This has been quite well known in many circles inside of Israel, but unfortunately, with the type of blank check that Biden has provided Israel, some of the most aggressive and ambitious plans have been adopted, regardless of the fact that their likelihood of success is extremely low. But as long as the U.S. is there continuing to support it, the political fallout for such a failed strategy can be pushed into the future. This has been a huge disservice to Israel itself, who could have pursued a very different path and not bogged itself down now in this war in Gaza, this slaughter in Gaza that is not only costing a tremendous amount of Palestinian lives, but also it is eroding support for Israel in the United States, particularly amongst the younger generation, in a way that we have not seen anything Israel has done in the past too.
Edmund, is Benjamin Netanyahu, at the end of the day, does he want peace with the Palestinians, or is this really about his political survival?
It's actually both. It's about his political survival. He wants to extend this conflict. He knows that he may be facing jail. And he may lose also his the election, but and because public opinion in Israel appears to be changing on a number of issues, but at the same time, I think that Netanyahu feels that he's now in a strong position vis-a-vis the administration, because the administration is the only country, the U.S. is the only country that's capable of putting pressure on Netanyahu, and so far we do not see that. In fact, we see further aid. What Secretary Blinken says, if we listen to him closely, he says that we're here, first of all, to achieve the ceasefire, although he doesn't talk when they ask him, is this going to be a permanent ceasefire? He does not give a clear answer about that. Then after that, when he asked what else, he said, we do not want to escalation. We don't want to see a retaliation, basically in reference to the what happened in Lebanon, the assassination of Shukr and the assassination of Haniya in Iran. And he does not want Iran or Hezbollah to respond. And so basically, he says if they respond, that's why we have sent military capabilities to help Israel. So basically, that raises questions about the role of the United States. Is the United States a real mediator? Is it a neutral mediator? Is it an independent mediator? Apparently, it doesn't seem to be that way. And we saw the example we just heard from the guests. Basically, Netanyahu, immediately after Secretary Blinken left, said that there are strategic assets that we have to maintain, that we have to keep in our hands. And basically, it was on the Netzarim as well as on the Philadelphia and the Rafah passages. And basically, he wanted also to maintain Israeli forces, keep Israeli forces in Gaza, so that they can check, he claims, basically, because we want to make sure they are not carrying any weapons going from the north to the south or vice versa. So basically, there have been also talks by some of the Israeli that they want to keep have a neutral zone, an area which they control between Gaza and Egypt. So basically, the Egyptians have said clearly they are not going to allow that or allow the Israelis control the Philadelphia. So basically, all this raises questions about the seriousness of the United States when it basically decides to send $20 billion to Israel just last week. So this all raises questions about the ability and the willingness, perhaps, of the U.S. To be a real mediator.
Understood. So, Dan, how worried is Israel about a wider regional conflict at this point? You know, we've had one assassination after another. Ismail Haniya's assassination, Israel is widely suspected to have been behind it. That happened in Tehran. Hours earlier, you had a leading Hezbollah commander. Israel did claim responsibility for that one in Lebanon. Then a couple of hours ago, a senior member of the Fatah in Lebanon was assassinated. Israel claimed responsibility for that one. One assassination, one killing after another. Does Israel believe this is the right strategy that will bring Israel peace and security?
I think following the assassinations, I think Israel was bracing for an attack from Iran and from the north, from Hezbollah. That has been the case for the last more than 10 days, that the entire nation has been kind of anticipating an attack. The negotiations in Qatar and then in Cairo were providing some space for such an attack not to take place. It's not completely clear what Iran has decided, whether it will launch an attack or not, and Hezbollah is still yet to respond to the assassination of Shukr in Beirut 2 weeks ago.
But Dan, let me interrupt you for 1 second. I just want you to answer this question. Does Israel believe, or let me ask it this way, does Benjamin Netanyahu believe its strategy in Gaza and these killings, whether it's Tehran or Beirut, does it believe what it's doing is making Israel safer?
Israel does not want a wider conflict, does not want a regional war. And regarding
Well, you did not answer my question.
Regarding the actions that it took, I think it felt compelled to attack the Hezbollah commander as a retaliation for the killing of 12 children in Majd al-Shams on the Golan Heights. As for Hania, Israel never took responsibility for it, although everything points to it, but it has not claimed responsibility. So I think that Israel believes it could continue with its actions, but not risk a broader regional war.
Trita, Iran. Everyone is looking at Iran to see how Iran is going to respond. Will it respond? When will it respond? What would that response look like? Your take.
Well, let me first just give a quick comment on what Dan said. I think Dan is actually quite right. Israel does believe that it can conduct these assassinations and continue to do so and not risk a larger war, precisely because of the fact that the United States is intervening and making sure, while it says that it doesn't want to see escalation, it is ensuring that Israel can continue to escalate with impunity. It's moving military forces there. It's sending warnings to Iran that if it does anything, there will be cataclysmic consequences, while at the same time, Biden apparently told Netanyahu, don't do this again. Ever since he said that, and he said it back in April as well, Israel has done it on numerous occasions again. So if you are in Israel right now, you can't blame the Israelis for not taking President Biden seriously. Why should they? He has done everything he can to convince the Israelis that he will always bend over backwards to appease them rather than actually pursuing U.S. interests, which includes, of course, avoiding a major regional war. So given that, I'm not so terribly surprised. Now, what will the Iranians do? I think we have reached a stage in which the Iranians, first of all, don't want to respond. It's very clear. They understand that this potentially could be a trap. They believe that Netanyahu wants them to respond, to use it as a pretext for further escalation. They have other priorities given Pezeshkian's new presidency. So I think they were hoping that there would be something coming out of these ceasefire talks against all odds that would give them an off-ramp so that they wouldn't have to respond. Now, when it's very clear that that's not going to happen, I think pressure is back onto them to respond. But I think given what they did in April and given the time that has lapsed, given the preparations that has been done on the Israeli side in case Iran responds similarly to April, I think the likelihood is increasing that Iran's response will be very different from April in terms of the methods and weapons that will be used, and that it will not be the type of an airstrike that happened in April in response to the Israeli attack on the in the Iranian consulate section in Damascus. What that is, it's impossible to tell at this point, but I think as every day passes, the likelihood of a repeat of April reduces.
Khalil, and then later to Edmund. I mean, do you gentlemen see any off-ramp at this point, more than 10 months into this conflict? Over 10,000 Palestinians killed, most women and children, hospitals, schools, UN facilities, aid convoys targeted. Gaza is pretty much in ruins. 9 out of 10 people are internally displaced. How do you put an end to this nightmare at this point? Khalil, first to you.
Sure. I do not see an end, frankly, to this conflict because the political will is not there on the part of Israel to stop its, let's say, aggression against Gaza or to end its occupation of Palestinian territories, whether it's Gaza or the West Bank. With regards to the attempt to reach a ceasefire, again, we've seen time after time the Israeli Prime Minister, again, subvert his main ally that funds him most recently with $20 billion in addition to other, dozens of billions of dollars. I don't know, this war is going already past, I would say cost-wise, maybe $150 billion. And I assume at least half of it is going to be from the United States, our own taxpayers' funds. Yet he finds it basically easy to challenge this administration because of past precedent. We have 10 months of essentially self-emasculation on the part of a U.S. president, allowing his ally in Israel, the Prime Minister of Israel, more time to finish the job, quote unquote, whatever that means. He's had plenty of time, but he refuses to take into consideration U.S. concerns and U.S. advice. And if that's continuing, not only continuing, but even escalating in the wrong direction, as someone just referred to, I hope we don't get an attack on mainland U.S. at this time, because so much of our force, naval and otherwise, is busy trying to protect Netanyahu in the Middle East. We have more than 60 pieces of our naval forces right now in the region, including a major nuclear sub and aircraft carrier, and all attached other destroyers and what have you. And all to protect a prime minister that we feel is manipulating the conflict for his own personal ends, as the president has admitted, and trying to achieve something unachievable, as everybody in the U.S. government now admits. So it's an irrational policy that's encouraging and enabling Israel to proceed and escalate.
Edmund, do you believe the United States is partly to blame for how long this conflict has gone on for? If you could keep your answers short, gentlemen, because I've got more questions for all of you.
Clearly, I think the United States has been, in a way, almost one of the main opponents of achieving a solution to this conflict. The U.S. has not done, it always has said from the beginning, even beginning with Oslo, beginning with Camp David, the U.S. said that we are the only country that can bring about peace between Israel and the Palestinians. And why? Basically because they said we have credibility with both and we are able to influence them, and therefore we can do it. So, but what happened after Camp David, we began to see Israeli settlers taking over Palestinian land. Then after the Oslo Accords in 1993, 95, they touted again a lasting solution. And what we saw at that time is that there were new settlements in the West Bank. More recently, we've been hearing a lot about the so-called Abrahamic Accord that are going to bring normalization of relations between the Arab world and Israel. And there are a number of Arab countries which normalized relations with Israel. Yet at the same time, what we began to hear from the Israelis, that the idea of a two-state solution is totally unacceptable to them. They are not willing to accept the idea either of two-state solution or of one-state solution, democratic state for both Jews and Arabs.
Edmund,
so basically,
I got to interrupt you, Edmund, because you brought up the West Bank, and I really, really want to talk about what's happening there too, and perhaps Dan can shed some light. While much of the focus has been on Gaza, settler violence has really spiked since the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel. Just last week, hundreds of masked settlers torched homes, torched cars. One person was killed. The UN, in fact, has documented over 1,000 attacks by Israeli settlers in the West Bank since the start of this conflict, averaging 4 a day. Why are we seeing such a huge uptick in violence by settlers, Dan?
First, I'd like to say that, we're all talking about the U.S., Israel, putting the blaming finger towards them. What about Hamas, who started this war? This war can end if Hamas stops it, surrenders, returns the hostages. Hamas has responsibility, but no one has any demands from Hamas, and that's unacceptable. As for the West Bank, Hamas is also trying to agitate the situation in the West Bank and to
How is Hamas trying to do that? I'm just curious. Can you explain to us?
It has cells, it has operatives, it has people there that are loyal to Hamas, and it's trying to light up the West Bank as well. Israeli settlers' actions should be condemned. They're unacceptable. They're terrible, and they do not represent official Israeli policy or government policy. They do get backing and support from some of the ministers, extreme right ministers in this coalition. And again, that should be condemned, and that's unacceptable. Having said that, there's a security situation which needs to be maintained in the West Bank by the IDF as to not to allow the West Bank to become another Gaza and to avoid an escalation there. And measures are taken by the IDF, but that's a separate thing. Settlers' actions are condemnable and should not take place.
My next question is to all four of you gentlemen, and it's about upcoming U.S. elections. The Democratic National Convention is going on. Tonight is night 3. We have not heard, as far as I know, because I've listened every single night, We have not heard much about what's going on with this conflict and there's so many people, so many Palestinians who have lost their lives. Also, the Hamas attack that claimed over 1,500 Israeli lives. What is going to happen in this election in November? What is going to happen with the battle state of Michigan that the Democrats desperately need to win? Michigan, we all know, has the largest Arab American population in the United States. What do young voters in Michigan want to see in the months that are remaining before election? Trita, let me begin with you, and please keep it tight.
Well, when it comes to those who have voted uncommitted in the primaries, it's very clear what they want. They've articulated very well, and that is that they need to see signs that there's actually a policy shift that Kamala Harris will bring about, and they want to see signs of it already now. If all she can provide them is a change in rhetoric and tone, greater empathy, at the end of the day, that will not be sufficient to make these uncommitted voters to become recommitted voters.
Dan?
I just think that between now and November, a lot has to happen. I think that Harris's candidacy has inserted a new element into this campaign. I think many of those who in Michigan and other places who were planning to stay away from the elections or not to vote for Biden, I think they're returning home and they are going to support.
Quickly, please.
And so I think that there's a good chance that Harris' candidacy will pick up and will enjoy strong backing also from those elements who were critical of the Biden administration's policy towards support of Israel and handling of the conflict.
Edmund, very quickly, 10 seconds, please. Edmund Ghareeb, you have the final word. You've got 10 seconds.
The administration hopes to basically achieve victory by saying that if we lose, do you want Trump to win? But I don't think that this is going to work in a number of states, and it's going to be a difficult election.
We're going to have to leave it there. These are complicated issues, and I'm sorry that I kept interrupting you, but we got to keep it under time. Dan Arbell, Khalil Jahshan, Trita Parsi, Edmund Ghareeb, thank you so much, and thank you at home for watching another edition of The Heat.